Hey friends, welcome to my channel, and today in this video we'll be creating code generator. So this is the third part of React beginner friendly series. So if you haven't watched the last two parts, I will highly recommend to watch those part before starting this project. Although I will be taking you from scratch in this project as well, so you don't need to worry about. So this is a simple web application that we are trying to build using ReactJs. So what it does, whenever we clicked on the next code, it will just fetch the next code with its author. Okay, so we will learn about how to fetch data using fetch API and ReactJs to populate it in UI. Okay, so we will learn about use state, use effect. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so now to create this, I will open up my VS Code. Inside the VS Code, as you can see, I have already created a React tab because I don't want to waste your time, and I cleaned up the files and structures here. You can Google it out how to clean the React files and folders. Okay, so it doesn't have anything fancy. It is just a normal app component here, which is empty, basically just has one div. Inside that div we'll be writing all the DOM or all the HTML code. Okay, I also have code.js, which is an empty file, which is what is basically the component. Okay, app.css is nothing but the universal styling for our application, and index.js, which is by default provided by the React. Okay, so we'll start off by writing some code inside the app.js. So I will write like div class of code box, and inside that we have heading h1 code generator. Okay, and inside that, so now that we have component, okay, so we'll make a use of component. So let me write the code for the component first, because we will import that component inside app.js and then we will write the code for it. Okay, so just bear with me. Once I write the whole thing up, everything will be cleared. Okay, so the basic is const, I will say code, so it will be an arrow function, and we will export that. So export default code, and it will return something. Okay, so now I will write the HTML required for the code component. So first thing first, it has a div. Okay, it has a wrapper div or the container div, and inside that it has p with the class name code, a paragraph. Okay, what's happening with this? Class name code, and here I have span, again another span. So I'm using this span in order to have this marker codes. So it is very difficult to find on Google, so I have this, copy and paste it. These are just the start and end of the code, which will make it look like more like a code than our usual text. So I have this copy pasted, and between them I have code. Okay, so I will not write here code because we want to fetch it using fetch API. So for now I will just leave it empty, and we also have another paragraph tag which has a class name author. So the author of the code will be shown here, and our anchor tag redirection is null, and class name next code. So this is the next code button that I have. So this is the next code button that you have seen earlier, okay, in the finished product. Okay, here it will contain a text like next code. Okay, I think that's it for the HTML. And now we want to make the GET request to the API. So what is fetch basically? So fetch is a JavaScript function. So this is inbuilt JavaScript function provided to make HTTP request. So you can use a fetch to make HTTP requests. What kinds of requests? Get request, post request, delete, update, means put. These are the kinds of requests you can make using the fetch API, and it returns a promise. So we have to handle the promise, we have to make it fulfilled and get the data out of the promise. So if you haven't heard about the promises or the HTTP request or XML HTTP request, fetch API, then you should learn more about it using JavaScript. If you want me to make a video, I will definitely make it. So here I will say use effect. So why use effect? I will show you and then I will explain you. Okay, so use effect takes an argument. I pass the empty array. Okay, so use effect hook is used for this. Use effect will run. Now we have provided the empty array, so the dependency of a use effect is empty array. So it will run once the page is reload. So on the first reload, it will execute the code inside the use effect. Okay, as we pass the empty array, the dependency is empty. Okay, so we can, because for the first time we also want the code to appear when we open the web application. Without clicking the next button, we want the data to be fetched and we want the code to be displayed on the page. So that's why we are using use effect. So mostly in React, if you are working with an API, you always use effect hook. Okay, so you can learn more about it on Google. And I will use fetch, and fetch takes an argument. So the first argument is request URL. Okay, so I have this URL which contains a enormous amount of data of codes and their authors in an object format. So I will show you that once I write it out. Okay, API / okay codes, right? So I will first open this URL so you can get a better look at what we're trying to build. So I will open up new tab and paste it. So as you can see, we will get the array of object, and each object contain a text which has code data and the author which has author name. Okay, so it has enormous amount of list. That's what we want. Okay, we don't want to store this data inside the an array of object inside our code, because that would be a lot of data. Okay, and that is the same task, so same repetitive task. Instead, we can make a GET request to this URL and can get all this data. The similar way we have created the data on our second ReactJs series video, where we have created accordion. Okay, so inside the accordion it has a question and answer similar way, but here we will be using the external API. Okay, so I will close this up, just go to this. Okay, so now that I write the URL, it will return a promise. So in order to resolve the promise, I will say then, not then, and it will contain the response So I will say response.json to convert the response into the JSON string, JSON. And then I will say I will get the data. Okay, data. And if there is an error, we need to cache that as well. So in case of error, just we will console.log the error. Okay, and I think now we need to create something to store this data. So if I console log here, you can see that we are getting the data. So we are making the fetch request successfully. Okay, so I will save all these files. So now if I go to this page and inspect the element and check the console, as you can see here, we are getting the array, and each array contains another array, that is nested array inside it, and contains the object. Okay, this is enormous object. So this data is received. So what we want here, now that we have this data, we want to store this data. Okay, because we don't want to write everything inside data, we will use states in React. Okay, so let's say const quotes and set quotes. So we use use state. Okay, use state, and initially it will be empty array. So once we fetch the data, we will set quotes the data itself. Okay, and to set the individual quote, so whenever the user visit the web page, this web page for the first time, we want to show the individual single quote. Okay, so this set quotes or the quotes state contains the enormous amount of object of a quote, but out of that we want to show the single. So let's say if I want to show the first quote on whenever the user visits the web page for the first time, I will create another state. So let's say quote and set quote, use state. So inside the use state, I will say null for the default value. And now you can see we have quote. So we'll set the quote. How I can do that? Set quote and data of 0th index. So the first quote that we'll be having is set to the set quote. Okay, and all the quotes is set to the quotes. So I'm making this plural in order to denote that it contains several quotes, and I'm making this singular because we know that it is containing the single quote. Okay, so now that we have this, we can just pass this data to the quote component. Okay, so first thing first, we need to import the quote component. So we'll do that, import quote. Now that we import it, we can pass the data as a props to the quote component. So if you haven't heard of props, so just a brief, the props are basically a way to pass the data between the components. So let's say here quote and say quote. So we will pass the single quote. Okay, we'll also have generate quote as a function. We want this function to be executed once the user clicks on the next quote button, so that the next quote will be shown to the user. I will close it. So now we pass the generate quote and the quote. So let me write the generate quote function here. It's a simple function. So I will create below the use effect, const generate code, and this is a add arrow function, and what it does, it set the code pay attention to this. So now whenever the user clicks on the next code button, this function will execute and this function will set the code. Okay, so how it will set the code? So let me write the logic first and then I will explain each step. Okay, so math.floor, basically we are tried to get the random index, so random code out of the whole codes. Okay, so let's say math.floor, math.random. So I will explain it, just bear with me. Into quotes dot length, and this will give me the random index. I will say quotes of the random index. So now what that mean? So math.floor is actually used to floor whatever the floating point we have inside it. Okay, and math.random will generate the random number between 0 and 1. So 0 is inclusive while 1 is exclusive, and dot length. So why we are doing this? This is a trick. So I will show you how this works. I will go to my browser. I will say inspect element, and inside the console I will show you something. So let's say math.random will generate a random number between 0 and 1. So 1 is exclusive. So let's say it has generated the random number 0.5. So into the quotes length. So suppose it is 30. So we have 30 quotes. So it will give me 50. So suppose we get a number like this. So now we can also get the number like this, because this is generating the random number math.random. Okay, and when we multiply it with the quote length, say 30, we'll get the number like this. But this is not the index of an array. You cannot have the index in decimal or floating point. Okay, so what we can do in order to prevent that, we can use math.floor and say 1.5242 into 30, that is the length of the quote. For instance, we'll get 15. So now we know that the 15 is in between the length of an array. So by multiplying it with the length, we make sure that it does not exceed the length of an array. So it will be always getting the number from 0 to 30. So we'll always getting the number, integer number, round up to integer number from 0 to 30, not a floating point number. Okay, so we know that from 0 to 29 are the indexes for the quote length of 30. For this it would be like, so is 1643. So our function will generate a random number from the range 0 to 1642, and that way we can pick any of the quote and show to the user. Okay, so now that you understand this, let me close it and go to the VS Code. Now that I have generated the random code and set it to our state, so our state will store the random code generated. So let's go to the code.js, and here I'm receiving quote because we pass the prompt as a quote, and the second argument is a generate quote. Okay, so this is the function. So we want this function to be executed once the user clicked on it. So let's say generate code. Whenever the user clicked on the next code button, we will call this function, which has reference to this function. Okay, so code, so we'll want to show the code. So how will we do that? And remember one thing, code is an object. Okay, so code has two keys: the text one, which contains the actual text of the code, and the author one, which contains the author of the code. So we will be fetching text, okay, and here we'll be fetching the author. So code author. So why are you using this question mark? So you might not have came across this, but this is very important. So I will show you the significance. So let's say if our code for because we are fetching the data from the API from the internet, it might be possible but that there is a fault or there is a problem with fetching the data, and the code contain the undefined or null value. Okay, so when the API is failed or when something went wrong on the internet, the code will contain null or undefined value. So if we try to access the dot author or dot text, or for instance any key of a null or undefined value, it will throw an error, and it will affect our web application. So once it throws the error, it will no longer execute the DOM, so it will no longer show our web application. So it will no longer show that code generator, this one, anything. So UI of the code will not be generated if the code happens to be null or undefined. So in order to prevent that, we will be using optional chaining. So this question mark says it is an optional chaining. So what is an optional chaining? So instead, when we have, so let's say our code happens to be null or undefined. So in that case, it will throw, the optional chaining will throw undefined. If it is null or undefined, it will throw an undefined, and it only throws undefined and do not check for the dot text or dot author, because it knows that if it start to check, it will throw an error and it will distort the entire application. It will distort the entire rendering of an UI. So to prevent this, to avoid this, optional chaining throws an undefined, so the user can know that, or user or developer can know that the code does not exist, but it will not throw an error because it is not trying to access the property of an undefined. So this is like an error handling mechanism we have using optional chaining. And why we use optional chaining? Because it is a shorthand way of handling the errors, and it is very frequently used, and you should always use it. It is a best practice to use it. Okay, so now that we have everything done, next code, everything, so let's try to test the application. So here we get our first code. How we get the first code? Because in the use effect, if you can remember properly, I will show you. Here we have the first code. Okay, so data of 0, so the first code is right there. Okay, and the author is also there, and the next code button. So if I click on the next code, as you can see, it has generated the next code and the next author. So we will style this up in order to make it look attractive. So I will minimize it and go to the style app.css. Also one thing, I think I need to add this so it will look like a code. Yeah, so now we will style this. Set the app.css. I will import the font. Okay, then I will write some code, like I will do resetting of my web page. So before, after, margin 0, padding 0, box sizing should be border box, apply the style to the body. So let's say font family. So now that we imported it, we can use the Poppins as a font family. Poppins sans serif. Okay, and minimum width. So I'm trying to center everything inside the body vertically and horizontally. So the way to do it is as follows. Min height is 100, view height. Okay, display flex, justify content center, align item center. So save it, and if you can take a look, now it looks pretty variable. It looks much different than, yeah, it looks good. So we'll go ahead and style other things. Okay, we have code box which contains our codes. So let's say it has some width of 500 pixel, some background color, let's say 232323, and a text color of white, padding from top bottom 1 rem and 2 rem from left and right. Okay, and codes box h1, text line center, aligning this to the center of the screen. And we also have next code button, next code. So we'll say display block, as this is the inline element, the anchor tag. We'll say display block because we want to apply the width, so we cannot apply the width for the inline element. So display block width 100%, text decoration none, to get rid of the default styling of my anchor. Text transform uppercase to make it capital letters. Background color (194) CC3. Okay, font weight 600, color white, font size, okay, font size is 1.4 rem, and padding 1 rem and 0 rem, top bottom. So let's see how it looks. Okay, it is looking quite good. And say text align center, it's looking good. So now let's check for the code. Margin 1.4 rem and 0 rem. Text transform uppercase, font weight 200. So span inside the code will have styling like font size 1.4 rem. Okay, margin should be 0.34 rem. Line height should be 1. Author text align right. Margin 0.7 rem and 0. So I'm not explaining this styling in depth because these are the pretty much the simple naive HTML and CSS styling. Okay, so if you ever feel why the margin is written in shorthand form and you don't know that, you can just Google it out. Next, code. So when we hover over the button, we'll make the background color as a little dark, 02319F. Okay, so save it and go to the browser, and as you can see we have this. So whenever I click on next code, it will generate the next code. So it will keep on going and generating the next code. And as we know and inside the logic we have random codes. So it will try to generate random code on each next click. So I think that's it for the today's video. I hope you learned something new. If you have any doubt, you can comment down and you can ask the question. And this is the part 3 of the ReactJs. We'll be having much more interesting project along the way. So stay tuned and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.